Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your stack of sources and distill them into the nuggets of knowledge and insight you need to know.
Today, we are opening up the files on one of the most intriguing and just contradictory figures in 20th century music history.
Absolutely. A man known by titles that seem to clash violently. I mean, he was the nabob of Sob.
The Prince of Wales.
And yet, and this is the one that always gets me, he was described by the great Tony Bennett as nothing less than the father of rock and roll.
That is the ultimate paradox, isn't it? And that's what we're here to unpack. We're doing a deep dive into the life and, the utterly pivotal musical legacy of John Alvin Ray, who lived from 1927 to 1990.
Right.
Our mission today is to navigate these sources, to really understand how he went from being this, obscure pianist in Detroit to an absolute global phenomenon in the early 1950s.
We're talking mass teen hysteria.
Mass hysteria, years before Elvis Presley even arrived on the scene.
And the reverse side of that coin is just as critical, Rice. We have to analyze why, after all that incredible early success, he basically disappeared from the American spotlight.
Completely vanished.
But at the same time, remained this monumental star internationally. It just doesn't add up.
It doesn't. And this mystery is only deepened by the fact that you have these hugely influential artists across decades. I'm talking Bob Dylan, Morrissey.
Wow.
Still holding him up as a foundational influence.
So the source material is pretty direct about this contradiction.
It's brutally honest. One source says he is barely remembered today in the U.S. So how does that happen? How does a pioneer who fundamentally changed how musicians perform become so thoroughly forgotten?
Yeah, that's the question.
We have to look at the drama of his life, the physical, the emotional challenges he faced, and see how those personal battles fueled this unique, pioneering stage presence that became his trademark.
So it's all connected.
It's all connected. Ray wasn't just a singer. He was an emotional bridge in popular music, and we need to study the architecture of that bridge.
Okay, let's unpack this history. It sounds like a story defined by drama from the very, very start.
It really is.
So let's start at the beginning. John Alvin Ray, born in Dallas, Oregon, January 10th, 1927.
Right. And his childhood sounds, on the surface at least, like a pretty typical quiet American upbringing, Pacific Northwest. He started playing piano incredibly young.
How young are we talking?
The sources say by age 3.
3.
And he was singing in the local church choir by age 12. Just a naturally musical kid.
The family eventually moves to Portland during World War II. He attends Franklin High School. He's picking up odd jobs after that.
All sorts of things. A soda jerk, a busboy, even a mill worker in Salem. And all the while, he's honing his skills, playing piano gigs in local clubs.
What's so crucial here, I think, is that while he had this amazing natural talent, the world he came from was just so far removed from the high-octane theatrical world he would later create.
A million miles away, he was a small-town kid with a gift. But then his entire trajectory was altered by a single catastrophic event when he was just 13.
And this is the event that really defines the emotional texture of his later career, isn't it?
It's everything.
Okay.
At age 13, Ray was involved in a really serious accident during a Boy Scout ritual. It was called a blanket toss.
A blanket toss? That sounds so innocent.
Deceptively so. This seemingly innocuous activity resulted in profound damage. It led to permanent deafness in his left ear.
That is such a shocking detail. That a childhood injury from a Boy Scout camp could fundamentally reshape a future musician's entire life and career.
And you see the physical challenge immediately. He had to rely on a hearing aid for his entire performing career.
But the struggle didn't even end there, did it?
No, it got worse. After a surgery in 1958, which was actually aimed at improving his hearing, the condition deteriorated. He was left nearly completely deaf in both ears.
Just think about that for a second. The mental fortitude required to be a professional vocalist, relying on amplification for the one sense that is most crucial to your art. It's almost unimaginable.
The irony is it's almost unbearable. But here's the crucial insight we get from the sources. Ray didn't just manage this disability.
Right.
He credited it as being absolutely pivotal to his unique performance style. It wasn't just a hindrance. For him, it became an artistic wellspring.
How so? Because, you so often hear about performers hiding a disability or fighting against it, but it sounds like Ray almost embraced its psychological consequence.
He did. He connected it directly to his emotional output. He explicitly stated that his deep need for sincerity traced right back to becoming withdrawn as a child because of the hearing loss.
So he felt isolated.
Totally isolated. And he said that feeling generated an emotional need to develop a relationship to other people.
So his high drama, hyper emotional stage presence, it wasn't just showmanship.
Not at all.
It was his way of desperately trying to bridge the gap that the deafness had created between him and, well, the rest of the world.
Precisely. His vulnerability was not an act. It was a psychological necessity that he channeled directly into his art. And this deep well of genuine emotional struggle made his performances profoundly raw.
Which would have resonated instantly with a generation of teenagers who were also feeling alienated in that post-war conformity of the early 1950s.
You've got it. That's the connection.
Okay, so let's look at the music he was absorbing during those formative years in Oregon. The sources highlight that he was heavily inspired by rhythm singers.
Yes, and specifically African-American artists.
Yeah.
People like K-Star, Laverne Baker, and Ivory Joe Hunter.
And this is the key, isn't it, to understanding his pioneering status.
Absolutely. He wasn't trained in the smooth orchestral stylings of, the Bing Crosby or Perry Como school of singing.
Burners.
He developed this highly unique style that kind of alternated between the driving rhythms and vocal phrasing of R&B pre-rock rhythm and blues and a more conventional classic pop approach. It was a real fusion.
But how did that sound, specifically? What was he doing that was so different from a traditional white crooner of the day?
Well, on the R&B side, he would often use a vocal break, a sudden shift from a smooth delivery to a strained, almost broken crying sound.
And that was often accompanied by those dramatic physical movements we talked about.
Yes, exactly. His musical phrasing was also less legato, less smooth, and much more syncopated. It reflected the blues and jazz influences he was picking up, especially from people like Billie Holiday and another singer, Little Miss Cornshucks.
So he was taking the emotional intensity of the blues and applying it to standard pop song structures.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So after singing professionally on Portland radio by age 15, that R&B focus pushed him toward a pivotal location, Detroit, Michigan. Why Detroit?
Detroit in the late 40s and early 50s was just a hotbed for rhythm and blues. It offered him the perfect environment to develop this hybrid style he was creating.
And he found a regular gig there.
He did. He started performing regularly at the Flame Show Bar Talent Club, which was a predominantly African-American nightclub.
And that setting itself just highlights his early crossover appeal. Here's this young white man soaking up and performing R&B in an environment where that music was foundational.
He wasn't just performing for a predominantly black audience. He was developing his craft alongside these pioneering R&B artists. He was learning from the source.
And this residency at the Flame is where the discovery story begins. And it sounds like it was a pretty hard sell, even then.
Oh, a very hard sell. A song plugger named Bernie Lang brought an OK Records executive, Danny Kessler, to see Ray perform. And Kessler, according to the sources, was highly skeptical.
Beyond skeptical from the sounds of it.
He was. Kessler famously remarked that the kid looks well on the stand, but he will never go on records.
Wow. What does that tell you?
It tells you two things. First, that his stage presence was immediately captivating, even to a skeptic. And second, that his sound was so unconventional for the pop market of 1951 that a record executive couldn't even imagine how to sell it. It just didn't fit in any box.
So it took some persuading.
A lot of it. It took the urging of local figures like DJ Robin Seymour and Lowell Worley from Columbia Records to persuade Kessler to even fund a test record. And that was cut at United Sound Studios in Detroit.
And the material they chose for that first record confirms his R&B roots.
It does. His first record, released on OK, was a self-penned R&B number called Whiskey and Gin.
And the label choice here is crucial.
So important. OK was Columbia's subsidiary race label, which was the standard industry term at the time for releasing music primarily aimed at African-American consumers.
So Whiskey and Gin was a minor hit in 1951, but the label placement meant that Ray was initially categorized purely as an R&B artist.
Correct. So the mechanism for his explosion, his big break, was really a commercial shift, not just an artistic one.
Explain that.
Well, this crossover is one of the most significant business decisions of the early 1950s. Once the executives at the main Columbia Records label realized that this Caucasian artist, who they had been marketing on their race label, was building a huge fan base among Caucasian teenagers.
They saw the dollar sign.
They saw the immense commercial potential of shifting him to the main Columbia label. And that move allowed his R&B-infused emotionality to reach a mass market that was just starving for something more exciting than traditional pop.
That crossover was the immediate launch pad for global stardom.
The rocket fuel.
So the moment he moves to Columbia, the switch is thrown. And that immediate success wasn't just a hit. I mean, it was an absolute tidal wave.
Oh, yeah.
He dominated the American charts in 1952 with that double-sided single, Cry, and The Little White Cloud That Cried.
Dominated is an understatement. That 78 RPM single sold over 2 million copies. For 1952, that is an incredible, almost unheard of figure.
He went from being a regional curiosity to a national, even international teen idol almost overnight.
And that single didn't just sell. It announced a paradigm shift in pop culture.
It was the intensity of the delivery on those songs that really made the difference. I mean, the songs themselves are fairly traditional pop songs, but Ray's interpretation was so jarringly raw.
It polarized audiences
Yeah.
and critics, but it made him a magnet for teenagers.
It signaled that the polite, reserved era of American pop music it was over.
Exactly. Teens were ready for intensity, for music that matched the anxiety and the energy of the post-war world. And he followed that up quickly with other massive hits.
Please, Mr. Sun, such a night.
The perennial favorite, Yes Tonight, Josephine. He became ubiquitous, and he quickly moved into the new medium of television, making several appearances on the hugely influential Toast of the Town.
Which later became The Ed Sullivan Show.
That's the one. Starting in January 1952, he was everywhere.
But to understand the true impact, we really have to talk about the live show. This is where those names, like the Nabob of Sob, came from. Can you describe the stage style that generated such pandemonium?
It was pure, unadulterated high drama. It was something completely foreign to mainstream white entertainment at the time.
So what would he do?
He would fully commit to the emotional narrative of the song. The sources detail a whole range of theatrics, tearing at his hair, clutching his chest, falling to the floor.
And critically, openly weeping on stage.
Openly weeping. It was this spectacle of vulnerability and passion that nobody had ever seen from a male performer.
It was the embodiment of the emotional breakdown set to music.
Yes. And of course, the media loved to label this extremity, which is why he acquired those incredible nicknames. Mr. Emotion, the Nabob of Sob, the Prince of Wales.
He was seen as either a genius or a hysterical oddity, but he was impossible to ignore.
And his performance style. It became the template for the uninhibited male pop star.
Which leads us directly back to the most critical claim in the source material. His status as a precursor to rock and roll. You mentioned Tony Bennett calling him the father of rock and roll.
I did.
But Ray wasn't playing with distorted guitars or a heavy backbeat. So how can he claim that title? What exactly does proto-rock even mean in this context?
That is the crucial analytical distinction to make. Proto-rock, or pre-rock in Ray's case, is defined not by the instrumentation,
But by the performance style.
the performance style and the audience response. True rock and roll, like Elvis or Chuck Berry, brought in a new beat, a new volume, new instruments. Ray introduced the attitude and the physical release that made those later musical innovations palatable for a mass audience.
Okay, so Ray's contribution was establishing the psychological and performative space for rock and roll to exist.
Absolutely. He legitimized the idea of a white male performer expressing raw, overt, and uninhibited emotion bordering on hysteria on stage.
And that was a direct channel to the overt sexual energy that would come to define early rock and roll.
A direct line. British hit singles and albums noted that his delivery influenced many acts, including Elvis, and made him the prime target for teen hysteria in the pre-Presley days.
We even know his manager confirmed that Elvis Presley himself frequently watched Johnny's concerts.
He did. So Elvis took that emotional template, he added the country and gospel rhythms he grew up with, and he fused it with Ray's theatricality. Without Johnnie Ray showing that vulnerability and that physical intensity could sell 2 million records, the landscape Elvis walked into would have been much, much less receptive.
It's logical, then, that with that kind of stardom, Hollywood would come calling, though his film career was decidedly brief.
Very brief. He made his first and most widely seen film, There's No Business Like Show Business, in 1954.
And that film itself is a fascinating historical footnote. It was a massive ensemble cast.
Oh, huge. Ethel Merman, Dan Daly, Donald O'Connor, Mitzi Gaynor, and of course Marilyn Monroe.
And Ray was cast essentially as himself, the emotional singer. He seemed poised for a seamless transition to screen stardom, but it just never materialized.
It never happened. He only made one other film appearance years later, a small cameo in a film called Rogues Gallery in 1968.
And even that film had a tragic distribution path.
It did. It was quickly withdrawn from theaters and only telecast in 1972. It never got a wide release.
And the sources say that when he was asked in the 1980s why he didn't make more films, he had a pretty blunt answer.
Brutally honest and simple. He just replied, "I was never asked."
Wow.
His intensity, which was perfect for a brief dramatic stage appearance, may have been too much for sustained cinematic storytelling. Or, maybe the controversies that began to swirl around him made him a poor long-term investment for the major studios.
His true defining medium was always the stage.
Always. Where the intensity of his presence could overwhelm any narrative structure.
This shift brings us to the great contradiction of Johnnie Ray's life. The intensity of his American fame in 1952 was matched only by the speed of its dissipation.
It was a brutal fall from grace in the States.
His career in the U.S. started declining significantly by 1957.
Right. He helped lay the groundwork for rock and roll, but once that real seismic shift happened, once Elvis and Little Richard and all the others took over the charts, the very market that Ray himself had created kind of turned against him.
So by 1960, his American record label, Columbia, dropped him completely.
They did. His sound, which had been so radical and new in 1952, sounded dated by 1957. He was caught in this limbo between the old pop world and the new rock energy.
And the evidence of his disappearance from the American scene is stark. He rarely appeared on American television after 1973.
And his final U.S. TV appearance was on a syndicated Shawnee broadcast in 1977. I mean, think about that. His time as a U.S. mainstream celebrity was over barely 5 years after it began.
And this is where the global story becomes so fascinating. While the U.S. audience was moving on to pure rock and roll, Ray was building a second, far more sustained career abroad.
His popularity in the UK and Australia remained immense. It was loyal.
And he wasn't just doing nostalgia tours over there either. He scored a major #1 hit in the UK in 1956 with Just Walkin' in the Rain.
Which is so interesting because the sources note he initially disliked that song.
Why?
He perhaps found it too conventional, too reserved compared to his usual high-drama material.
But that fact illuminates a key cultural difference, doesn't it?
It does. The British audience seemed less interested in that strict line between pop and rock and roll that was emerging in the U.S. They appreciated Ray's sincerity and his drama, regardless of the underlying genre.
They saw him as the quintessential American entertainer, and they rewarded his loyalty.
He was so popular there that he broke the attendance record at the prestigious London Palladium.
A record previously held by another huge American star, Frankie Lane.
Exactly. To hold the attendance record at the London Palladium speaks to the sheer drawing power he still possessed.
And this international loyalty was vital for him. It provided a reliable income and an emotional boost for decades.
A lifeline. He retained huge, dedicated fan bases in places like Australia and the UK right up until his final global concert tour in 1989. The difference was that overseas, the drama he embodied was seen as high art.
Whereas in the U.S., post-rock, it was often dismissed as camp or just hysteria.
It's a completely different perception.
So despite this global safety net, his life in the 1960s was still pretty fraught with legal and financial issues.
Oh, very much so. He spent time in Spain during the mid-60s trying to untangle himself from contracts with his previous manager, Bernie Lang.
What was the issue there?
Well, the sources suggest that Ray and his new manager, Bill Franklin, believed Lang had been dishonest and was responsible for these crippling debts owed to the Internal Revenue Service.
Which certainly contributed to the end of his U.S. success.
Of course. That turmoil is the real backstory to his comeback efforts. By 1969, he was trying to reassert himself publicly, and he headlined a European concert tour alongside the legendary Judy Garland.
What a pairing.
Can you imagine? This period really cemented his place in the history books of performance drama. He even acted as the best man at Garland's wedding to Mickey Dean's in London that year.
He had a small, limited U.S. comeback in the early 1970s, and this is remarkable because he hadn't released a new record in nearly a decade.
He used television to try and reestablish himself. He made appearances on The Andy Williams Show in 1970, and critically, 3 times on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson between 72 and 73.
So for a moment, it seemed like the high drama of the 50s might have found a niche in the nostalgic 70s talk show circuit?
For a moment, yes. But those offers quickly dried up again, proving the revival was short-lived.
However, he did find a new sense of purpose in the 1980s. In 1981, he hired a new manager, Alan Eichler.
And crucially, he changed his performance style. He started performing with a small trio instead of those massive orchestras from his heyday.
And this stylistic simplification might have drawn the renewed attention of American critics.
I think it did. That same year, 1981, the New York Times published a major critical reassessment, acknowledging the irony of his infrequent U.S. appearances.
What was the core of that critical insight from the Times?
The Times stated that Ray's R&B-infused emotional style helped lay the groundwork for the rock and roll that turned Mr. Ray's entertainment world around.
That single sentence just perfectly encapsulates the tragedy of his American career.
It does. He was the catalyst for change, only to be consumed by the change itself. He paved the way for the new world, but the new world had no place for him.
It just underscores the two-tiered reality of his career right up to the end. In the 1980s, he's playing these small U.S. venues, Citrus College, the Vine St. Bar and Grill.
Intimate niche spots.
Yet at the same time, he was still being booked for massive venues in Australia, England, and Scotland as late as 1989.
The forgotten pioneer at home, the living legend abroad.
His final performance was fittingly in his home state of Oregon, a benefit for the Grand Theater in Salem on October 6, 1989.
A quiet end to a very, very loud career.
So, to really understand the source of that high drama that fueled his music, we have to address the intense and often painful personal turmoil that defined his life. This includes several public and private scandals.
Yeah, this is critical context for understanding the intense pressure he faced, especially at the peak of his career.
Let's start with the arrests, which the source material lays out pretty clearly. There's a pattern that begins even before he was famous.
Right. In 1951, before Cry ever broke, Ray was arrested in Detroit. He was charged with soliciting and accosting an undercover male vice squad officer for sex.
And where did this happen?
In the restroom of the Stone Theater, which was a burlesque house. He pleaded guilty to the charge, paid a fine, and was released.
And because he was still obscure at the time, the local Detroit papers didn't pick up the story.
No one knew who he was. But once Cry hit the charts a few months later, those rumors about his sexuality fueled by his overtly emotional and theatrical stage presence began to spread nationally.
What followed was a highly public maneuver, one that just speaks volumes about the constraints placed on gay or bisexual public figures in the 1950s.
A classic move for the era. In May 1952, at the absolute height of his U.S. fame, Ray married Marilyn Morrison,
the daughter of the owner of the famous Malcombo nightclub.
That's right. The wedding was a major PR spectacle. The New York Daily News put it right on the cover.
It was a classic beard marriage, wasn't it? I mean, a transparent attempt to quell the rumors that threatened to derail his career in a deeply conservative America.
It seems so. The sources indicate that Morrison was fully aware of the 1951 arrest. She even reportedly told a friend that she would straighten it out.
The implication being that she would help him conform to public expectations.
But the strain of maintaining that facade was just impossible. The marriage lasted barely a year. They separated in 1953 and were divorced by 1954.
And Ray himself, in a 1953 interview, he blamed the rumors about his sexuality for the breakup.
He did, although several biographers later concluded that the marriage was almost certainly undertaken under false pretenses from the very beginning.
And the trouble didn't stop there.
No. In 1959, Ray was arrested again in Detroit, this time for soliciting an undercover officer at a place called the Brass Rail.
Which was described by some as a known gay bar and a hangout for musicians.
Exactly. However, in this instance, he was found not guilty at trial. But the pattern, it just highlights the constant legal and social danger he was living under.
The reality of his private life wasn't really confirmed until after he died.
That's right. Biographers, 2 years after he passed away, confirmed that Ray was bisexual. They revealed he'd maintained a long-term committed relationship with his manager, Bill Franklin, from 1963 to 1976.
And that relationship notably started years after his brief, explosive marriage.
It puts the sham marriage in stark context. A temporary public sacrifice designed to protect a career that was built on emotional truth, yet forced to operate under social deception.
And adding another layer of complex hidden drama to his private life is his close friendship with the celebrated and controversial journalist Dorothy Kilgallen.
Yes, which lasted until her unexpected death in 1965.
This friendship has generated some extraordinary claims in recent years, specifically regarding Kilgallen's personal life.
It has. A researcher named Mark Shaw has posited that Ray actually fathered Kilgallen's youngest child, Carrie Colmar, who was born in 1954.
And what's the basis for that claim?
The claim is based on Shaw's research suggesting that the Kilgallen marriage had become purely a business arrangement after she discovered her husband's infidelity in 1953.
And Shaw further notes that Colmar's husband disowned the child after her death, which just adds to the intrigue.
It's an assertion that, while controversial and rooted in decades-later research, really speaks to the incredible hidden life Ray lived parallel to his public persona.
Did Ray ever address this specific claim?
Never. According to his later manager, Alan Eichler, Ray was completely devastated by Kilgallen's death in 1965, but he never spoke about or acknowledged the persistent rumors that he had fathered the child.
So whether true or not, Ray maintained absolute silence on it.
Kept the secret buried. It's a fascinating, unresolved biographical mystery that further cements that high drama label that was applied to his entire existence.
Beyond the drama of his relationships and arrests, Ray struggled intensely with alcoholism throughout his life.
Yes, though this was generally hidden from the public eye during the peak of his 1950s fame. We do know, however, that he was arrested for public intoxication in Boston in September 1952.
Which was right after his major breakthrough.
Right at the start. The arc of his health is just tragic, and it also intersects directly with his professional low points. In 1960, the year Columbia dropped him, he was hospitalized for tuberculosis.
And according to his biographer, Johnnie Whiteside, after this recovery, Ray quit drinking completely.
Yes, leading to a period of sobriety that lasted several years, which coincided with his absence from American media.
But that period of sobriety was interrupted tragically. In 1969, shortly after returning from that European tour with Judy Garland, a doctor gave him some terrible advice.
Just the worst. The doctor advised Ray that he could drink an occasional glass of wine.
And Ray took that permission and, unfortunately, resumed drinking heavily.
Yes, and this led to a steep and final decline in his health, even as he continued to tour internationally due to that enduring overseas loyalty. The years of hard drinking severely damaged his liver.
His poor health finally forced him off the stage and into Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles in early 1990.
And he died shortly thereafter, on February 24, 1990, at age 63. The cause was hepatic encephalopathy,
which is a degenerative neurological condition resulting from liver failure.
a final, dramatic curtain call for a man who lived his life defined by emotional extremity. He was ultimately laid to rest back in his home state at Hopewell Cemetery near Hopewell, Oregon.
So when you step back and look at the totality of Johnnie Ray, the pioneering mix of R&B and pop, the emotional intensity, the theatricality, the tragedy, it's clear why his influence stretches so far beyond the 5 or 6 years he was a dominant chart presence in the U.S.
Absolutely. His melancholic songs and his dramatic stage performances became the DNA for the modern emotional pop star.
The roster of artists he influenced is just staggering.
It is. We're talking about the Beatles, Bob Dylan, Elvis Presley, Elton John, Leonard Cohen, Morrissey. I mean, these are figures across multiple decades who built their careers, in part, on the foundations of emotional vulnerability and theatrical sincerity that Ray established.
Let's focus on that Dylan connection for a second, because the source material provides such an illuminating quote. Dylan cited Ray as an influence before he ever listened to rock and roll.
Or Hank Williams. And this detail is so often missed in the standard music history narrative. Dylan said, and I'm quoting here, "He was the first singer whose voice and style, I guess, I totally fell in love with. I loved his style, wanted to dress like him too."
That quote positions Ray as a foundational influence on the greatest lyricist of his generation, not just some early pioneer of performance.
Exactly. He taught Dylan the power of that raw, uninhibited emotional delivery, that sense of a singer exposing their soul on stage.
This is key to understanding how Ray bridged the gap between the Tin Pan Alley generation and the singer-songwriter era that followed.
Ray showed that the performance itself could be an act of profound self-exposure. Elton John and Leonard Cohen later drew on this melancholic sincerity.
And Morrissey, of course, the ultimate nabob of sob for the 1980s. He basically inherited Ray's crown as the purveyor of depression-fest pop music.
He did. Ray established the archetype of the brooding, intense, deeply feeling male artist.
And his influence isn't just felt in the artistic lineage, it's woven into pop culture references across the globe, especially in places where his popularity remained high.
Dexy's Midnight Runner's massive 1982 hit, "Come On, Eileen," is the perfect example.
Right.
It's one of the best popular culture references to Ray. The lyrics specifically mention him. "Poor old Johnnie Ray sounded sad upon the radio, moved a million hearts in mono."
And the choice of the word mono just perfectly evokes the sound of those original 78 RPM hits.
To drive the point home, archival footage of Ray arriving at London Heathrow was actually used in the song's iconic music video.
That moment in the video ensures that a whole new generation, who may never have heard Cry, still recognize the image of this high-drama American star who was always weeping.
And Billy Idol followed suit years later. In his 1986 song, "Don't Need a Gun," Ray is not only name-checked in the lyrics, but
Ray himself appeared in the music video.
as a taxicab driver, which just speaks volumes about his status at the time. He was recognized enough to be included in a major rock star's video, but he's playing the part of a working man, a nod, perhaps, to his obscurity in the U.S.
And for sheer historical trivia, he holds a distinct place in pop music history, being mentioned in the very first verse of Billy Joel's 1989 hit, We Didn't Start the Fire.
The verse that catalogs the major cultural events of the late 40s and early 50s, he's right in there.
And let's also remember his contemporaries who immortalized his style. Eartha Kitt.
A fellow master of vocal dramatics, she referenced him in 2 different songs. In Monotonous, she sang, I even made Johnnie Ray smile for me. And in I Want to Be Evil, she declared, I want to sing songs like The Guy Who Cries.
Which demonstrates how immediately iconic and recognizable his stage persona was. It was already fodder for satire and adoration at the same time.
And his music remains relevant today, often sampled and recontextualized. Portishead, the trip-hop pioneers, sampled his I'll Never Fall in Love Again in their 1994 song Biscuit.
His legacy is preserved not just through references, but in physical form. He received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1960.
And his large catalog is kept in continual release worldwide by giants like Sony Music Entertainment. For the real collectors, Bear Family Records issued 2 comprehensive 5-CD sets of his entire body of work in 1999.
Which ensures that those thousands of recordings are preserved for future analysis.
And this preservation allows for the necessary scholarly reassessment, which often circles back to that central paradox of his contemporary obscurity versus his historical importance.
Music journalist Robert A. Rodriguez, writing in 2006, really drove this point home.
Rodriguez's assessment is perfect for positioning Ray for a modern audience. He wrote, though barely remembered today, to the 50s record-buying public Ray was something of a former-day Leonard Cohen or a Morrissey, creating a body of work that was the very definition of Depression Fest.
That comparison, Cohen or Morrissey, is so powerful because it moves him out of the 50s novelty bin and places him firmly in the tradition of the deeply melancholic, intense, and brilliant songwriter, someone whose art is defined by sadness.
And finally, we have to return to the source of his profound vulnerability, his deafness. Scholar Cheryl Hare summarized the importance of that physical reality to his style.
What'd she say?
She noted that Ray was a singer whose hearing range appears literally to have defined the contour of his performance, the nature of his short-lived popularity, and his enduring iconic status in pre-rock and proto-rock.
So his disability didn't just affect his career.
It created it.
It's a powerful final analysis, showing that the physical challenge of his deafness was inseparable from the emotional power he generated, making him this unique cultural phenomenon that both exploded onto the scene and then quickly burned out in his home country.
What an incredible journey into a forgotten history. We found that Johnnie Ray was truly the crucial emotional bridge between the reserved crooners of traditional pop music and the raw, uninhibited energy of the rock and roll that followed.
He was a performer whose deeply troubled and complex personal life, defined by his deafness, his need to hide his sexuality, his arrests, his struggle with alcoholism, was not just tangential to his career.
Not at all.
It actively fueled the high-drama stage theatrics that made him an international idol and, critically, helped revolutionize the presentation of popular music.
His hyper-fast dominance in the U.S. charts highlights the volatility of popular music tastes in the early 1950s. The audience was ready for change, but they quickly moved past the pioneer once the genre he helped launch arrived in full force.
Yet his sustained and intense popularity overseas reminds us that true artistic sincerity, when it's paired with unforgettable drama, often finds a loyal audience far beyond the cultural spotlight of its origin.
It really does.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you reflect on this forgotten pioneer? We know Ray attributed his iconic need for sincerity to the isolation caused by his deafness, and his performances were universally described as emotionally draining. This forces us to confront a fundamental question about performance itself and the commercial reality of music. Whereas Johnnie Ray's iconic Mr. Emotion stage persona, the man who wept and tore at his hair on stage, was it a calculated strategic act of entertainment designed to sell millions of records?
Right.
Or was it an essential and unavoidable expression of profound emotional and physical vulnerability?
And perhaps more critically for his lasting legacy.
Yeah.
If that distinction is impossible to draw, does it even matter? If his unique, tear-filled style revolutionized music and created the template for the intense, emotional pop star of the future,
Right.
then perhaps the emotional impact is the only sincerity that truly counts.
That is certainly something to mull over. Thank you for diving deep with us into the contradictory world of Johnnie Ray.